So Super Metroid was the pinnacle of the series as far as the 2D output of Metroid was concerned. Some might argue it is still every bit as compelling as weathered as its contemporaries in the genre. And let's be honest, if this game wasn't as good as it was, Koji Igarashi wouldn't have a template to rip off for his decades worth of Castlevania offerings. So how do you replicate that kind of experience onto the Game Boy Advance, a portable system with somewhat comparable but lesser hardware? The answer, of course, is that you don't. You take some of the core bits that worked in Super Metroid, streamline it a bit to accommodate the limitations of the GBA, and you try to make the most compelling and fulfilling Metroid adventure within those constraints. The resulting game, Metroid Fusion, released in 2001, is naturally a step below what came before due to a shift away from open-ended exploration and more towards an ever-present narrative and linear path that guides you along the way, making for an adventure that is somewhat smaller in scale. Now, does that make Metroid Fusion any less of a game? I may have improperly worded that question, but let's dive in anyway. The story is kind of a mouthful. While on a survey mission, Samus was infected by an X-parasite, and this results in parts of her suit being removed and sent to a lab, which gets attacked somehow, and it's up to Samus to uncover the cause and stop it. Now fortunately, the lab in question is home to various habitats recreating various environments, thus curtailing any thoughts of having to explore a dreary space station with little to no variety in scenery, but remaining firmly within familiar territory, having Samus explore various worlds and such. Now Metroid Fusion, much like a previous portable Metroid adventure, Return of Samus, on the original Game Boy, is more of a linear affair than the open-ended adventure that the previous game was. In fact, Fusion actually enforces this linearity by introducing a computer AI who tells you exactly where to go and what to do, thus killing some of the mystery that would come from exploring your surroundings and solving certain puzzles and such. Oh, there's still plenty of that involved if you want to seek out extra bits to build yourself up, but no longer are you stumbling across major new upgrades to progress or discovering new things on your own. Now you got a hand to hold you firm on the designated path to wherever you need to go at that point in time. Part of this has to do with a more focused narrative that Fusion employs, as there is more backstory exposition provided in regards to the surroundings, Samus herself, and even the bothersome AI who is based on a former commander of hers from a past life and future denigration, but we don't want to talk about that here. Also, when little things happen, the elevator stops working all of a sudden. You have to take care of those things before you can progress further or find other means of reaching a certain area when a normally accessible passageway has been blocked off. These are things that could have been done without sacrificing or derailing the explorational open-ended nature that Metroid thrives on. However, while Fusion might not be as open-ended as Metroid or Super Metroid and such, when it comes to atmosphere, that's perhaps the game's greatest strength. See, in her current state, Samus is much weaker than usual, with a newfound vulnerability to extreme cold due to a Metroid-based vaccine used to save her life. Even towards the end, when you've amassed all there is to amass in terms of weapons and equipment, she's still not quite at her former level. Meanwhile, there's an X-based clone of Samus roaming around in full gear, and she's on the lookout for her original host and stuff. This leads to some neat stealth-based play where you have to sneak past this ever-looming SAX in order to avoid a chase and firefight that you simply cannot win in your current state, though eventually the whole game is basically building to that final confrontation and such, but whatever. Actually, thinking back, Fusion is where they start infusing a more focused narrative, the exposition, the little side missions you have to undertake. Sometimes when approaching a potentially tense moment, the music will change to something more sinister or befitting the new tone that they want to convey. Something that was done in Super Metroid here and there, but works a little better here due to the more constrained nature of the game. In that regard, I suppose I could forgive the lesser scope of Fusion since its atmosphere and narrative were given more of a focus. Again, these are things you could do with a more open-ended adventure, but I imagine constraints also had something to do with how this initial adventure on GBA was shaped. Going from a Super Nintendo gamepad with its 4 face buttons and 2 triggers to a GBA with 2 less face buttons means tweaking the controls, and so Metroid Fusion became the first game where you had to hold the trigger to shoot missiles, of which you have several types. It takes a little getting used to, and in all honesty, it was a solution to a problem that didn't really exist, but after a while, it almost becomes second nature for the platform. It's not something I'd want to see on a platform with more than 4 buttons, but whatever, what are you gonna do? Other than that, Samus plays about as well as she did in the past, perhaps a bit weaker due to her more compromised state, but sooner or later, after raiding data rooms and defeating bosses and absorbing their parasitical embryos, you'll attain new powers from the familiar to the new. There's a new grip move that lets you hang on to ledges, and for the first time in the series, there are ladders you can climb, which is mildly surprising. I'm shocked they added ladders after, 3 games? Beyond that, it follows the usual Metroid formula and pulls it off admirably. Perhaps lesser in its scope, but still a solid focused romp in that universe. Metroid Fusion sports some colorful graphics with some highly detailed and smoothly animated characters, whether it be Samus, the very critters, or the boss monsters you encounter. The locales you visit are both varied and uniform in their design. Your different environmental settings, your deserts, ice, forest terrains, and such, to represent the various ecosystems on the station, while still very much reminding you that this is a space station in space and not some planet somewhere, which would have been a little more preferable. Probably not the most exciting settings you'll come across, but it looks good enough, and there are some nice little touches here and there that I'll let you discover for yourself if you haven't already. Sound production holds its own just fine in Metroid Fusion. Sound effects are top-notch, with lots of screeching noises, which, okay, they're not all that great, but hey, the explosions sound fantastic with more punch than ever. And the music is also pretty good stuff. Not quite the atmospheric soundtrack of Super Metroid, there's more of a techno beat in some of these tunes. But there are some good tunes in there, some suitably thematic pieces for certain situations, memorable boss tunes, and other stuff. There's even a couple of voice bites in there, which is a thing that they included, and yeah, that's all I got. Overall, Metroid Fusion is a perfectly adequate little Metroid game for the Game Boy Advance that, while nowhere close to reaching the heights of its predecessor, nonetheless did what it could with the hardware at hand and crafted a portable experience worthy of the series. If nothing else, it's a more meatier and somewhat more flexible portable outing than the previous portable Metroid on the original Game Boy. It's a somewhat different take on the formula, and it is also, as of this recording at least, the last Metroid game in the series canon, as everything that came afterwards is either a remake or takes place before or in between, and whatever. In any event, you like old Metroid games, you haven't played this one yet, give it a shot. It's fun.